Recording in progress.
Very good. Well, welcome again to our presentation today. We are featuring Chris Bishop, and he's going to tell us all about jobs, the future of work, how to compete. Chris is an old hat. He has done this numerous times in his career. And even though it's very inundating and difficult and scary to reinvent yourself, Chris has had at least 5 different jobs over his lifetime. He was a rock musician on tour. He was a jingle producer. He was a website project manager. What does websites have to do with being a rock musician? I have no idea. Well, he's going to tell us how he made that change, the career leap, and how it really does all interconnect because of those transferable skills, okay? Based on his atypical career path, Chris developed a program called How to Succeed at Jobs That Don't Even Exist Yet. You don't even know about them. So how do you succeed at that? I don't know. He's going to tell us all about that. He has been a speaker for TEDx. He has been a speaker at a lot of networking events. And today he's going to share some information with us on how we can succeed in job search in the future of work. Take it away, Chris.
Okay, great. Thank you. So people are still entering. I'll leave it to you to.
I will absolutely.
Them,
right? And, they're always late. Don't be deal. Glad that you're on time.
Well,
and
I apologize.
Yeah, I'll let them in.
Okay.
No worries.
Hide presenter view. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. Hang on. Let's go back to Zoom. Okay, here we are. Share screen. Voila. Okay, can you see that?
It is almost here. Started screen sharing. Now it's up. Yep. I can see it.
Okay, let me make sure. Yeah, so it's a little QuickTime movie of a future city. You guys see that?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So thank you, Christine. Delighted to be here. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share my perspective with all of you. I'll give you a little bit of how we're going to go through this today. I'm going to share a little more detail on my background. You know, who's this guy? Why is he here? What's he know about this stuff? Give you some socio-historical perspective. I think it's always good when talking about the future to think about the past. You certainly can learn from it. Give you my take on emerging careers, how they work and where they exist. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about new learning models, because that's key to emerging careers. And then I have something called my Future Career Toolkit that I put together based on how I've navigated. Actually, it's about 8 careers so far, and then share with you what I think is next. So my background. So these are some kind of fun images. The upper left is me. I spent 3 years touring with a band called McKendree Spring right after college. I have a degree in German Lit from Bennington College in Vermont. This is me on the road somewhere in a dressing room, opening for the Eagles in like the spring of 1973. Me in my leather pants at CBGB's with my power trio. After getting tired of being on the road, I ended up in the jingle business. I played bass and sang on the first Kit Kat jingle. Give me a break. Ow, give me a break. Break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. So was in the jingle biz for about 10 years in New York. And then taught myself to be a web producer, worked at a couple of agencies, as Christine mentioned. And then much to my surprise, was hired by IBM into corporate internet programs. This is me with Watson right after that AI instance crushed the reigning Jeopardy grand champions about 10 years ago now. I was working in corporate citizenship at headquarters. So I spent 15 years at IBM. I e-tired about 8 years ago. This is me at my TEDx talk in New York at the Times Center. The lower left is me at Caltech. I gave a series of webinars on the future of fintech for State Street Global Advisors. So it's been an interesting journey so far. And again, what I've done is sort of taken and codified how I navigated this nonlinear multimodal path and put it into a toolkit, which I'll share with you at the end of the session. So,
Chris, can I ask, we have a question in the chat box. If you could turn up your microphone, they're having a problem hearing you.
Really? Okay. Let's see. Let me make sure I'm on the right mic. Hang on. Yeah, let's test microphone and speaker. Well, that's the speaker. Testing 1, 2. Sounds
I can
pretty
hear
loud.
you. I've turned up my mic to hear
Yeah,
you.
sounds pretty loud
Fine.
here. I'd suggest that the person having trouble maybe turn up their volume. Anyone else having trouble or no? Good.
We can hear is what I am received.
Okay, I just say I don't think it's on my end. With all due
Okay.
respect, I think
All right. Very good.
the speaker volume. Okay. Anyway, but keep me posted. Hopefully,
Mhm.
everyone else can hear.
All right.
Okay, so that's me. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. Uh, I like to talk about the concept of work, which has been constantly reinvented, literally for thousands of years since we were like hunter gatherers. It's always driven by technology, whether it's how to make a spear and throw it. And it's part of a process that's been going on again for thousands of years. So here's a cobot with a human, right, interacting with machinery. Again, technology writ large has always been part of how we work and how jobs and careers morph and evolve. So at this point in the program, I like to do what I call my pop quiz. So I'm going to give you this quote, and I want you to think about any history buffs. Raise your hand. Any history buffs in the audience? No? There we go. Good, cool. So the pop quiz is who said this and when and about what? Right? So
Anybody suggest in the chat box? Can
yeah,
you think of
or
who
just
does
unmute and shout it out. So right, the quote is, I refuse to issue a patent for fear it will put my poor subjects out of work. So key, giveaway is subjects, right? So implication, I'll give you a hint, right? Implication is this is a monarch of some kind. How about I'll do it this way with an accent that might give you a hint. I refuse to issue a patent for fear it will put my poor subjects out of work.
King George was one of the answers.
That's a good guess. That's my bad British accent. So anyway, the answer is it was this woman,
Queen Elizabeth.
Queen Elizabeth I, and she said it about a mechanized knitting machine in 1589. So 430 odd years ago, there was always cultural apprehension about technology, disenfranchising people who had current skills. So the meta message is this kind of conversation's been going on for centuries. There are lots of books written about it. This predates the Industrial Revolution, textile manufacturing upheaval in Britain, the Luddites, right? So some people might say that's what AI is doing today, right? Putting people out of work. It's a technology that's emerging. Or get ready for quantum, which is going to do the same kind of thing. Blockchain, machine learning, on and on, right? That's the big picture perspective. So this is probably too much detail, but there's a great book, Technological Revolutions, Financial Capital, by a woman named Carlota Perez. She's a Venezuelan economist. She teaches at Oxford. She basically breaks down the last 350 years into 5 cycles of about 40 to 60 years each. Each one is initiated by some innovation, some technology. There's some kind of crash or resolution, and then ultimately a deployment and assimilation, standardization. So, for example, the one I like to cite is from number 4, the age of oil, automobiles, and mass production. So in 1908, when Henry Ford started rolling out Model Ts, any color you want as long as it's black, in Detroit, the farriers and blacksmiths got very, very nervous, right? It was like, we don't really need people with those skills anymore. Thanks for stopping by, guys. So I had a similar experience as a bass player in New York in the 80s when music became data and you had to learn how to compose and sample and sequence on a computer. Again, similar, that sort of was a revelation for me. Oh, if I want to stay in this business, I better figure out how to do what the next skill set is that's required, right? So smart farriers maybe opened a motel or a roadside attraction or a car wash. Smart blacksmiths maybe had some sense of carriage building and they had transferable skills about how to build a carriage and had to learn how to operate a internal combustion engine. So I won't go into more detail, but she has videos on YouTube as well if you want to learn more about this kind of thinking around cycles tied to technology and business.
I think
right?
this slide that you have shown us is very in your face. It's showing us exactly what you're talking about. A lot of people will tell me, why do I have to do anything? Why do I have to learn? Can't they just find me? And then can't they just figure out I have transferable skills? And that kind of goes through exactly why we need to make those changes.
Yeah, well, for sure. So here's a great quote by Thomas Friedman, right? The author of The World is Flat, one of the first books about sort of globalization and how we interoperate as a market-driven global economy. He says, he's a New York Times journalist and author, more people can compete, connect, and collaborate in more ways for less money from more places than ever before. So really, that's the good news, right? The idea is if you can get on the network, you can work. If you can jack in, especially now with the pandemic, has really, reshaped how we work and how we interact and how people make money and how companies run their businesses. So I see that as an exciting aspect of where we are in 2021, right? Keep in mind, many of the top jobs in 2021 didn't exist 5 years ago. So autonomous vehicle operator, that's a new business model. That wasn't a job 5 years ago. Google wasn't recruiting for that job 5 years ago. Crypto asset strategist, the uproar around Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and crypto assets even more broadly, right? Not just money, not just new models for capturing and storing and distributing value, but smart contracts. Quantum algorithm designer. I'm very active in the quantum space. I just was on a session before this talking with sort of think tank and business executives who are exploring how to use quantum technologies to drive business models. Vascular tissue engineer. I was at an event recently where a guy was talking about additive manufacturing strategies, including bioprinting. And this guy's title was like bioengineering senior strategist or whatever. So they were conjuring ways to print vascular tissue and hearts and lungs. Again, pretty innovative, new models. The attendant ancillary is that, many of these companies didn't exist 5 years ago. Those kind of jobs exist at companies that didn't exist. So that guy I mentioned, the bioprinting scientist works at Tissue Labs. That wasn't a company. 3IQ is a digital asset management firm in Toronto that gives clients exposure to Bitcoin and other digital assets. Hyperloop, right, is a new model that Elon Musk is driving around transportation using giant vacuum tubes that propel people in containers at 700 miles an hour. I mean, SpaceX, they're leading the way in terms of private sector interaction with NASA, helping advance the space program. NIO is a Chinese electric car company competing with Tesla. So new models. These are some people that I have worked with that have jobs again at some of these companies. So Will Zhang for example, he's a young hotshot at Goldman Sachs. He runs the quantum research desk there. Hillary Carter's managing director at Blockchain Research Institute in Canada. This is Patrick Thayer, who's the bioprinting solutions architect. So these are real people doing real jobs, many at companies that didn't exist or that have transitioned. So Goldman, for example, hiring a guy like Will Zhang to figure out where there's value in quantum is a pretty major transition, right?
So let me ask you, all of the companies that you are mentioning are pretty much science-based. If you don't have a science background, does that mean you're kind of left out in the cold, that you don't have an opportunity for a job for the future?
No, that's a good question. I'll go back to this slide. So this is a slide I use when I'm talking about quantum information science as an evolving workforce perspective, right? So certainly there are scientists and researchers driving this. This is just an example. But there are salespeople, there are user experience design people needed. There are educators to teach about quantum or any of these other advanced technologies, robotics, blockchain, AI, machine learning. There are people who need to be involved in determining regulatory and policy guidance, right? People that will work in the public sector, in government, to determine how you manage and regulate this new technology. And then there's optics and photonics, which in the case of quantum is basically the picks and shovels, right? Levi Strauss made his money selling tents and picks to the California gold rush miners. He's the one who got rich did well anyway, has a company that has lasted over 100 years. So there's that tied to any of these technologies. And then to your point, Christine, I mean, comms and PR, somebody's got to articulate how this stuff works and what the business value is. You got to market it and brand it. The woman who's the chief marketing officer at Zapata Computing, for example, Catherine Londigan, came from BBDO, a major general advertising agency, had clients working in technology like Apple, and was intrigued by quantum and was hired to run their marketing at the top of the function away from a general advertising agency. She now runs marketing at Zapata. Investment guidance, right? And strategy consulting. So companies like, management consulting firms like McKinsey, Accenture, Deloitte, BCG, their clients want to know what the business advantages are going to be of any of these new technologies. So does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, it's transferable skills and new skills, right? So that's sort of the theme we're going to go through here. From a meta perspective, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics put out a report a few years ago that predicted that today's learners will have a certain number of jobs by the age of 38. This is pop quiz number 2. Any guesses for what that number might be? Put it in the chat or just shout it out, unmute yourself. What do you think?
15.
15 is a good guess. Yeah. Any others? Higher, lower? No? Actually, do I have the chat open? Let me make sure I can see what people are saying. Anyway, the number is, ready, drum roll. They're saying they'll have 8 to 10 jobs by the time they're 38. Now, standard mean deviation, indicates that some will have more, some will have less. Some may do a job for a few years, but the general sort of terms of service now is like 18 months to 3 years. And the reason these people, Gen Zs, early mid-career millennials will have this many jobs is because they can and because they want to. And they're comfortable acquiring new skills and moving into new roles, not because they get fired or they have to or whatever. And especially you're seeing something called the Great Resignation. If any of you have read about that in the paper, the articles in the Times and the Journal, people are leaving jobs because, for one thing, they discovered after working from home and having flexibility in terms of lifestyle management, they actually hated the jobs they were doing. And because there's opportunity now driven by technology, they can bail on these companies that don't treat them right. And they've got to, businesses have to rethink how they hire and support and train and reskill, right? So that's a pretty amazing number. Estimates are that 85% of the jobs that today's learners are going to do in the next 10 to 20 years haven't been invented yet. Like the slides I showed you before, top jobs today that didn't exist 5 years ago. This is an ongoing and accelerating trend. They're going to use technology that doesn't exist. So implantable and ingestible medical devices, perhaps, holographic learning and training tools. This is a vertical farm somewhere. So new models around ag tech, for example. And they're going to use it to solve problems that we don't yet know are problems. So how do you do mining on an asteroid? How do you set up a resort on the moon?
How do you know what problems are that are not problems yet? How do you figure that out? Do you think? Does someone tell you?
You have to pay attention.
Okay.
All right. And they'll appear. So, I mean, climate for sure is one, right? At a meta level. But I mean, how do you say, how do you use technology to build, say, an underwater farm, a kelp farm, right? So we're going to need to feed billions more people over the next 20 years. We've got to come up with solutions. That's a problem that we think might be a problem, but we're not sure if it is and how we'll solve it. Sustainable energy. So how do you build and design and deploy and support like a tidal wave electricity generation module or plant, right? So like figuring out how to repair your iPhone wasn't a problem 10 years ago. It's a problem now.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
Those kind of problems are going to continue to emerge, both small and large, right? So that's framing for the conversation around emerging careers. So where do these emerging careers occur? Where's the nebula? What do they have in common? I contend that they have 3 traits that they share. They connect unlikely disciplines. They're driven by tech, of course, and they're going to require old and new skills. And that's where these new careers exist, right? So let's say you're into mechanical engineering and pharmacology. A new career for you might be nanopharmacy. So the three chemists who won the Nobel Prize a few years ago for chemistry won it for creating nano machines, machines that operate at the 10 to the minus 9, right? So this is an example of an ingestible robot that finds plaque in your vein, identifies it, and then destroys it in real time, right? So combining skills with mechanical engineering at the nanoscale with the ability to deliver pharmacology, medicine at the molecular or even atomic level is a new job, a new set of jobs, right? And how do you support that innovative approach? There's a building, a brand new building at MIT on the campus, a $400 million structure, 9 floors of clean rooms focused only on nanotechnology and how it might be applied across a range of verticals and industries, right? So that's one example.
Let me ask you, Chris,
Yeah.
maybe a company doesn't know that they actually are going to need for your example, a nanophysicist or pharmacist. Would it benefit the person to read up on those transferable skills that they'll need so they can become that nanopharmacist before any company actually says, hey, I could use a nanopharmacist?
So I'll share some detail in the Future Career Toolkit about how that works, right?
Okay.
The meta response is you've got to stay abreast of what's changing and what's coming. So if you're a pharmacist, you should know that this is going to be a new skill that's going to be required. If you're a mechanical engineer, you should understand that this is one of the ways you could apply your skill and be remunerated, right? Get a job. It's coming. There's already a company in California that was founded by these two UC Berkeley doctors that's created something called neural dust. And it's a device at the size of a grain of rice, and it's implantable, and it generates ultrasound. It also captures data around things like blood pressure and electrolyte levels and that kind of thing. So that's happening as we sit here, right? So another example, urban studies and mobility. So maybe you're into like how to get around cities. You might be intrigued to be working on new models like, autonomous passenger drones or vehicles like these buses that go over traffic as opposed to around them or through them. And these kinds of vehicles might have offices or restaurants or bookstores or shopping opportunities or maybe even apartments, right? New ways to get people around urban settings. So that's a new combined skill, disciplines maybe that didn't necessarily connect historically. Maybe you're into robotics and law. This is a really interesting area. So this is an example of some of the Boston Dynamics robots, right? Big firm in Boston that was actually bought by Google and then sold back to them. But, who's responsible if this robot drops a 10-pound box on your foot? Where does the proverbial buck stop? Or this robot breaks a piece of grandma's Waterford crystal when it's loading the dishwasher. Or this robot, steps on your cat going up the stairs. So is it the manufacturer? Is it the company that leased the robot? Is it the software developer who created the software? Mercedes, for example, has said that for their autonomous vehicles, they will take responsibility. The buck will stop at sort of the top of the business, right? But these are all, questions that need to be answered. I mean, will
That's
robot
very interesting. It almost makes me want to go into law.
Yeah. Well,
because I don't have an answer for many of those situations. That's
but nobody does. That's why it's an interesting new field, right?
Yeah.
Will robot lawyers defend robots? Maybe. Given the advances in AI, it's conceivable.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
This is my favorite, actually, hospitality and astrophysics. So there are lots of examples of this, but there's a company called Orbital Construction that's planning to put up a space hotel. They're going to start building it in 2025 and hope to launch it in 2027. It'll have like 400 rooms, a cinema. There'll be research labs, of course. So one of the questions it begs is, how do you mix and serve a martini in microgravity? or who's going to be making up the beds and being a chambermaid in a floating hotel. Again, this is a little phantasmagoric, admittedly, but there is a company that's looking to put this kind of device facility into space, right? And charge people to go get a view, if you will. So there's just some examples of emerging careers, again, at the intersection of disciplines that might not have been historically connected. We can't talk about future careers without talking about new learning models. Key message today is that you have to keep in mind education is not an event that happened in the past, right? You can't think of it as something, oh yeah, I went to college and then I'm done. Or, I maybe had some on-site training at my company, when I first joined to orient me as part of the onboarding process, and then that's it. Nowadays, learning is a lifelong process. You need to learn, unlearn, and relearn. This is a great quote from a gentleman named David Blake, who's the CEO of a company called Degreed. If you haven't heard of them, I encourage you to investigate. They have this terrific cloud-based tool that connects learning management systems, right, LMS systems at corporations with what he calls publicly available learning assets. So they have this tool that lets you design your own learning pathway and pull in, say, blogs or TED Talks or magazine articles or Wikipedia entries, whatever. It has a very social function as well. But the key is his manifesto says the future doesn't care how you became an expert. So learn where you can learn and how you can learn. And the good news is there are lots of options. So people heard of massively open online courses, MOOCs, right? Those are available from lots of vendors like edX and Coursera, Udacity. MIT and Harvard make a lot of their courseware available online for free, certainly Khan Academy. And the challenge is picking and choosing and rationalizing, but lots of options for lifelong ongoing learning. Back to the question, Christine, of taking current skills and identifying what the gaps are and figuring out what you need to learn and where you can learn it. So these are some options. Some non-traditional learning options. So Wikipedia, certainly. YouTube, a friend of mine rebuilt the engine in his Ford Explorer using YouTube videos. He rented a winch and cranked it out of his car and put it on a rack and took it apart and put it back together watching YouTube with a wrench in one hand and the laptop in the other. LinkedIn Learning has a lot of courseware that's available actually for free if you're a premium member. Following people on Twitter, they point to, thought leaders point to articles and blogs and content that's valuable and learning oriented. TED Talks for sure. One of my favorites is this one on the lower right, Espresso, which is a daily sort of content repository published by the British magazine, The Economist, and it updates both business as well as sort of social cultural news every morning, 6 days a week. And you put it on your phone. I check it every morning to see sort of what their take is on advances in business and culture, what's going on in the world. Laszlo Bock was the head of HR, if you will. He was the SVP of People Operations at Google. For many years, he's left to form his own startup. But he says the world only cares about and pays off on what you can do with what you know. And it doesn't care how you learned it. This will be true no matter where you go to work. So that's the new model, right? They just want to see what you know how to do and how you can help them, being the company, right, solve their business problem. So if you learned it on Coursera or you learned it sitting in a Starbucks, taking a course on edX, or if you went to Harvard or you went to MIT or Caltech, as long as you have the information and the skills, doesn't matter where you acquired it.
I hear a lot of feedback, Chris, about not necessarily putting those schools or online courses, company names on your resume, but being able to have a conversation demonstrating that you have that knowledge, that you are an SME in that particular area speaks much louder volumes than just a name.
Yeah. And to follow on that thread, Christine, I always encourage people, especially students, where possible, to put up digital assets or examples of their work on their LinkedIn profile, right? So if you gave a talk or you wrote a paper or you wrote an article or you spoke to a group at a meetup, and there's a video, put it on Vimeo or YouTube and put a little abstract on your LinkedIn profile and point to it. Now they want to see what you've done, that you know what you're talking about, that you have skills. And a lot of those companies now offer things like nano degrees and certificates of completion. There's a classic story. This is a bit extreme, but a young coder developer who was like living at home and, sleeping on his mother's couch in the basement, but it was an incredible coder. And this company Guild, right, went to GitHub or Bitbucket, these sites where people post their code, and evaluated, what developer in here gets the most response, gets the most positive accolades. And they tracked this kid down because his code was like laudatory, right? That people were like, this thing is a fantastic solution or whatever. And they interviewed him and they hired him. And he's now like, doing very well as a lead programmer at this technology company. So that's a little anecdote about how this works, right? Makes sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Should I pause for a moment? Any questions? I got to redo this so I can see the chat. Here's a chat. Okay.
I have a chat, but it's lots of comments on how you have a very interesting perspective and gave people a lot to think about. So very exciting. And
Good.
I think you have a captive audience. They're
Well,
not going
good, okay.
anywhere. You can't
All
stop talking.
Well, good. Then I'll go on then. Good. So that's setting up what I call my future career toolkit. So again, I've had 8 careers in 45 years, quite wide ranging as I described. So I began reflecting on, what were the common threads? What were the common processes that I used to navigate from one to the other? And there were always bumps in the road. I mean, moving to New York to become a professional bass player, I lived in Manhattan for 16 years. I got my butt kicked a few times. I didn't know how to really play bebop tunes or read a lead sheet accurately the first time, but I figured out that was a skills gap and I better figure it out if I'm going to run with the big dogs. And so I did. I took lessons and went to a little music school on the Upper West Side. Anyway, but this is my attempt to lay out in a tactical, practical, scalable set of tools, ways to define your own brand using voice. The second tool is antenna, which is designed to help you find conversations of interest to you, where conversations are going on around the characteristics you tease out in the voice exercise. And mesh is ultimately connecting with the people who share your interest, who might give you a job, who might employ you, right? So let's jump in. The Future Career Toolkit number 1, voice. So the idea is to define your uniqueness. What is it that you do that no one else can do? What makes you stand out? What skills and experience make up your personal brand? It's sort of like product development on some level, right? And keep in mind, your voice is going to change and evolve over your work life, no matter if you're, my age or younger. I mean, mid-career, the opportunities to change your voice and to get in touch with your voice still exist, right? So here's the exercise. I developed this with a friend who's a ideation guru. He has a company that does this for a living called the Growth Engine. And he has a whole portfolio of these kinds of ideation exercises, semantic intuition, best worst idea, all kinds of stuff. And we've put together this exercise based on his recommendation. So the idea is you pick a favorite movie, book, TV show, or game, and use it as a trigger. And it can be current or from your childhood. And think about what you like about it. Write down 2 or 3 aspects that you relate to. Again, I've shared this deck with Christine, and she can share these templates with you. You can use them. There's also a workbook I can share with you, Christine, that you can share. Put together.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
A PDF version of this. And I have a LinkedIn learning course. I'll talk more about that later, but where me and the producer sort of laid this all out on video. But so here's the exercise. Pick a favorite, trigger, and then write down the characteristics. So here's mine. So for a movie, I picked Blade Runner 2049 because I'm fascinated by future culture as well as technology. How is technology going to impact what we do, how we live, and how we work? I love that movie. I saw that movie 3 times in the spirit of full disclosure. I saw it in IMAX, I saw it in 3D, and I saw it in a regular theater.
So do you have it memorized now?
I do. I have it pretty much memorized. No, I found it fascinating. And I liked the first one too, right? Years ago with Harrison Ford. So that's one, trigger. The second is I picked a book called More, which is written by Philip Coggan. He's a writer at The Economist, again, that magazine in Britain that talks about business. And his book is called A History of Economics from the Iron Age to the Information Age. And again, I'm sort of a closet economist. I actually took a continuing ed course from Oxford University last winter called The History of Economic Thought. But I'm interested in economics and global business. I mean, at the end of the day, we're living in a global market-driven economy. So, it's got to generate revenue. The line's got to go from lower right to upper right. You got to have more coming in than's going out. So it's a fascinating book, by the way. I highly recommend it. It's thick, but it's well written. And if you're into this kind of thing, it's a pretty easy read. So those are my triggers. So the second exercise is antenna. Now, the good, Wordle represents, information, right? The good news is there are lots and lots of sources of information today. The bad news is there are lots and lots of sources of information today. So the idea is you've got to rationalize and do triage on the content that's out there in order to find stuff that's relevant to you and your career path, right? So the exercise number 2 is to research 1 to 2 sources for each voice topic. You can do more if you want. Pick a range of sources and media and channels, right? And then assign a frequency. We want to put a framework around this, a regimen, right? Some longitudinal parameters. How often are you going to check? So here's my filled in grid, if you will. So I've teased out the 3 characteristics from my voice attribute exercise. So the source for Future Culture is a website called Futurism. They also have newsletters, and I check it daily to see what's up with. Some of this is pretty far out, but some of it is more near term, and implications around jobs, right? So, what's the latest and greatest around some technology that has implications for business opportunities. The Futures Agency is run by a gentleman in Zurich, and he does webinars periodically, about like every quarter. So I always sign up and attend those. For tech, I'm a big fan of the MIT Tech Review. They have a website. They print a hardcover magazine quarterly now. They have lots of newsletters as well, focused on AI, on economics, on space, on cyber. BBC Click is a TV show that's on every week. It's also on YouTube, and they have a Twitter handle as well. But they talk to leaders in business and very often in academia that are working on projects that are eventually going to turn into real business models, sort of, again, at the bleeding edge of technology and business. And then for global business, Bloomberg Tech, which is a TV show that's on every day at 5 o'clock. Emily Chang is the moderator. Really interesting conversation. I think of it as the Entertainment Tonight for Silicon Valley. They get as gushy about entrepreneurs as Entertainment Tonight does about movie stars, right? They'll be like, oh no, what's Tim Costello going to do now that he's left Twitter? Oh my God, I can't imagine he's going to start a new company. He's going to align with this venture capital firm. Maybe he'll go to Y Combinator. But it's really smartly done and very insightful. And then Marketplace, certainly a podcast that's on every day. But other sources, so this is sort of my list, but I mean, the sources could range widely. It could be elite newspapers. I mean, I read the New York Times on my phone every day. Could be TikTok, could be a YouTube channel, could be a TEDx speaker that you follow. Open yourself up to all kinds, and these channels are going to change and morph and evolve, right? So Clubhouse, for example, a brand new way to learn and interact. So the next Clubhouse is being developed as we sit here. You can be sure of that. So again, just think about, and while this looks sort of more complicated than it is, I encourage you to realize that you've already done a lot of this work. By that, I mean, check your bookmarks. Like, what are websites that you go to a lot? Or, check your inbox for newsletters maybe that you subscribe to. So those are indicators of topics of interest, which hopefully tie to your voice triggers, right?
And they're topics of interest to you as opposed to the entire world or your best friend or your sibling or spouse. And so that is going to be catered to your interest, not necessarily someone else's interest. And I think this is a wonderful idea, Chris.
Yeah. So this is, again, where these conversations are going on. based on your areas of interest, right? And they're certainly going on. Again, the challenge is winnowing down the list and getting it to something manageable. Um, but start small, start with a few sources, and then build out as you get more comfortable with the model, right?
Mhm.
So that's tool number two. And then the third tool is what I call mesh. So this is what's called an in-map. LinkedIn used to offer this capability. You could do a data visualization of your network. I think they determined 5 or 6 years ago that the server load wasn't warranted based on the attributable revenue that it generated. But the idea is, I share this because it gives you a sense of how you might visualize your network. So for me, might be the blue in the lower left is people I worked with at IBM. The upper left in green might be futurists. The lower right might be musicians, right? The orange. The purple on the way lower right might be family and friends. I mean, the idea is you have people in your network now that range across disciplines and verticals and skill sets, some of whom may help you find a job based on where they sit now, right? And how
What
you
do you
connected to them.
think personally, Chris, kind of being out there and keeping track of all the different sources, and we're just kind of catching up to you as far as podcasts and TEDx talks and New York Times and et cetera, et cetera. If
Yeah,
we're at the next 2 years, 3 years, what do you see as really prominent as far as careers go, or, definitely jump on board because it's going to be the next big thing?
yeah. So one word, quantum.
Okay.
Quantum technologies, quantum information science. And I'm happy to talk to any of you about it. And the segue too is please reach for me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect. But that's going to be the next AI, the next World Wide Web, the next social media, the next mobile technologies, the next personal computer. I mean, I'm going back in time, but that's kind of where technology is heading. And again, they're going to need people with all kinds of skills. My meta admonition is chase the maelstrom, find the chaos, go for the mayhem. Like point to where they don't know what it is yet. The royal they being existing business models. And then you could contribute, you can weigh in. It's an opportunity to be creative, and you can get remunerated, right? So that's a theme that's worked for me for 45 years.
I've heard that exact same thing from others in different fields, that somebody might have an interest in XYZ and they put their heart and soul into researching it, knowing everything about it, becoming an SME, and they had no idea that in 10 years they were handpicked because they have all these skills and nobody else has those skills. So they really made them that ostrich, so to speak, that was so unique to other people, having those skill sets that they just took for granted.
Yeah. But again, I would look for where stuff is emerging, right? So new business models always appear at the edge, at the fringe, right? And then back to Carlotta Perez's chart, right? So, and then they get codified and standardized and finessed and revised, and eventually move more toward the center, right? I mean, we all remember when cell phones were the size of a brick, right? And now, you can get a watch that has a radio, cell radio in it. You can make calls on your wrist. So that's the model to keep in mind, right? Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about the third tool, which is mesh. And this is a really actionable exercise, again, where I encourage you to go to LinkedIn. That's the lingua franca. That's the, coin of the realm. That's the pleated pants of social networks, but it's where conversations around business go on, like it or not. Pick 1 to 3 people to connect with based on your shared interests. So take the parameters you pulled out of the voice exercise, put them in a Boolean construct, right? So maybe it's future tech plus business plus quantum, and see who comes up. And if they look like they're interesting and or in a role where they have discretion and or headcount or a checkbook, certainly connect with them. Or if they're doing something interesting, get on their proverbial radar, right? Ideally, if you're feeling ambitious, ask for a 30-minute informational interview. Say you want to learn more about what they're doing, and introduce yourself and talk about what you do, right? And make it a job, right? Make it a daily exercise, if you will. Then you want to find a group to join based on the topics that you teased out, right? Because when headhunters or hiring managers or recruiters or senior execs look at your LinkedIn profile, they want to see at the bottom who you're following and what groups you're connected with, because it indicates your brand, right? So if you're interested in quantum and you're following Betty Crocker, that's not good. You want to be following David Ashalam or John Preskill or John Martinez, right? The thought leaders in the space. So whatever discipline you're interested in, track down those people and also look for those groups or companies or organizations.
I think this is key. The tool 1 and 2, definitely to know a little bit more about you and increase your SME. But tool number 3 is how you're going to find others that have similar interests, such as using groups and connections. And that was a question in the chat box. And I definitely recommend tool number 3 and doing it bullet by bullet. Absolutely.
Yeah. So here's an example again. So people that I've connected with, for example, tied to my voice attributes. So Future Culture, this gentleman, Garrett Leanhart, who's actually a guitar player also. He's the CEO of the Futures Agency, and he runs those webinars I described. So I reached for him. We've connected. In terms of tech, I reached for Krista Svor. She's the GM of quantum software at Microsoft. For global business, I've actually been able to connect with Thomas Malone, who wrote a great book called The Future of Work. He's a professor and author at MIT Sloan, the B School at MIT, right? So those are just examples. In terms of a group, for Future Culture, the Institute for the Future, which is a think tank in Palo Alto connected with Stanford University, has a LinkedIn group. And there are many groups like this. I encourage you to join a group, again, tied to your voice attributes. Look for groups with a lot of members, though. Look for a group that has like 10,000 members or whatever. Don't join a group that has 17 members, unless it's like a friend or very niche. But I mean, you want to cut a broad swath, because at the end of the day, it's a numbers game, right? The net is it's the more people who know who you are and what your skills are, the better your odds of getting a job. Again, LinkedIn is a tool. So maybe Krista Svor may not have an opportunity or headcount in her organization, or she may reach for me and say, Chris, would you moderate this quantum event? Or someone may come to her, a peer or someone in her organization, and say, Krista, we're running this quantum event and we need somebody who knows how to moderate. You got any ideas? Yeah, I know this guy, Chris Bishop. He works for Insight Quantum Technology. I saw him do an event last year. It was pretty cool. Here's his email, or find him on LinkedIn.
You got it. That is exactly it, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah. So in conclusion, so voice, continually reflect on what makes you unique and know that it will evolve, certainly. Antenna, be diligent about monitoring sources and finding new ones. So as your voice changes, so I've had 8 voices, if you will, and it's changed. When I was a musician, I read New Musical Express, this kind of trashy British music newspaper, or I would read Guitar Player or Downbeat or whatever. And then as I got into the computer thing, I'd read Macworld and PC Magazine and that kind of thing. Nowadays, I read MIT Tech Review and The Economist. So again, antenna sources are going to change. And then mesh, key. Add 5 people a week to your profile. I always say, especially to university students, I say, if you get to 5 o'clock on Friday and you haven't added 5 new people, stop what you're doing, put down whatever, get a mocha latte, and go on LinkedIn and find 5 new people to connect with. You want to be jiggling on doorknobs. You want to be making sure people know who you are. I liken it to the direct mail model, right? In the old days when they send out postcards, if you send out 100 postcards and 1 to 3 people reply, you're doing pretty good. That's like a good rate of return. And that's how it works. I mean, I'm sure you all know this, right? Especially people looking for jobs. You've just got to play the numbers and work it, right? That's what it is. So that's the toolkit. A little plug for my course. I have a course on LinkedIn Learning called Future Proofing Your Data Science Career. If you have a premium account, it's free. If not, I think it's $29. But the thing I want to mention is about 20 minutes in, part 3 is the Future Career Toolkit. And it's me and the producer going through mapping this out on a whiteboard and talking about how it works. And I think if you find it interesting, it's a visual example of how we put it together and how you might apply it to your own job search, right? So that's it. Hope to see you in the future, and I hope you found this valuable. And please connect with me. Here's my email address, chris@improvisingcareers.com. I have a website, improvisingcareers.com, where I post travelogue stuff about what I'm doing. You can learn more about the webinar sessions. I do workshops at universities called How to Succeed at Jobs That Don't Exist Yet. This content geared more towards students. Certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Twitter as well. I'm at Chris Bishop. So, Christine, I'll turn it over to you if we want to answer some questions in the chat box or whatever.
I think that we've answered most of the general questions from what I can see. Wonderful. Thanks so much. Thank you for this presentation. That kind of thing. Yeah, I think we're good. Once I share the URL link of the recording with you, you will have that as well as a copy of the chat box for you. And you will receive all of Chris's information to connect with him on LinkedIn once again. When you go to YouTube, you can view and replay the recording of today's session, and you will have it at your fingertips, and just in case you missed something. So, Chris, anything else?
No, thank you. And again, please reach for me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to continue this conversation. And
thank you. I mean, it was definitely a pleasure to have you, but gave us so much to think about. And we are quickly approaching in the middle of the future of work. So it's really important that we take notice and figure out our next steps.
Great. Well, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Good luck to you on your next presentation.
Thank you. The Quantum Podcast is next.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for attending, and I hope to see you in October.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.